Israeli political analyst Amit Sigal, and he's joining us now from Jerusalem. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Christian. Thanks for having me.
Can I ask you, Amit, whether you can fill in any details, whether you know any more details of a ceasefire? Periodically, we're told, there's hope, and then, of course, it doesn't happen, and the hostages don't get returned. Can you tell us what you know now? The details?
As always in the Middle East, it's always good to stick to cautious pessimism. Israelis have their habit of playing chess with themselves and usually lose. We have a heated debate in Israel. You showed the finance minister in Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet. But at the end of the day, since November, each and every time Hamas demanded one major thing in return, which Israel couldn't have given him this, which is the end of the war. And that's why this hostage deal has not been achieved yet. And I have to admit that I'm still a bit pessimistic from what I hear, because Hamas refuses to this. He understands that as long as Israel continues the war, even after a period of 6 weeks, he is finished if Israel dismantles Hamas in Rafah.
Okay, so I've also heard that pessimism because, yes, you're right, Hamas wants a full ceasefire and Israel wants to do other things. So what do you think? Because the next question is, will there be a ground invasion into Rafah?
Well, a ground invasion into Rafah is not an Israeli whim. There is a logic into it, and that's why Israel is pushing. By the way, this is the only consensus in the Israeli cabinet. Even ministers from the left, like Benny Gantz, support entering Rafah at the end of the day, because there are 3 strategic assets by Hamas in Rafah. One is the last 5 battalions of this terror army that invaded Israel on October 7th with those horrific results. Second is the senior figures in Hamas, Sinwar and Def, number 1 and number 2. If they are killed or caught by Israel, it means at the end of the war with an Israeli victory. And the third thing, which is the most important one, is cutting the chain of supply, the lifeline for Hamas from Egyptian Rafah. Through the tunnels, Hamas gets all the commodities, all the explosives, all the weapons that he wants. I'll just give you one example, Christian. Each cigarette that is sold in Gaza is sold by Hamas, and they sell it 300 times the cost of a single cigarette. All this money goes to fund terrorist activity against Israel. That's why it's so important to cut this lifeline in Rafah.
So let's talk about what the Prime Minister and what you've heard from your sources, either him or close to him, thinks about the choice he has to make, whether to defy the United States or to do what it appears his right flank is pushing him into do it. As you know, a friend of Israel, the columnist Thomas Friedman, says Netanyahu has to decide, is it Rafah or is it Riyadh? Do you want to make, an international coalition, or do you want to be pushed into a very unpopular and potentially very difficult for everybody, particularly the Palestinians, invasion of Rafah?
So it's interesting, Christian, because, I stood right here at this very roof of my house in Jerusalem just 2 weeks ago, and I watched this amazing spectacle of Middle Eastern cooperation of Saudis, Jordanians, Israelis, Americans. That is to say that there was a Muslim, Jewish, Christian cooperation against fundamentalist Islam. What Thomas Friedman always writes, by the way, since give or take 1995, is a deal that I never hear from Saudis or people from the Emirates. I only hear it from Washington, New York, and London, which means for Israel to give up its security and get the prospects for peace in the Middle East. By the way, what Saudis really want, behind closed doors, I guess you hear it as well, is eliminating Hamas as a regional power. Because if Hamas ends this war on its feet, it means that he got away with killing 1,200 Israelis, Americans, and British. That's why Saudi Arabia wants Israel to eliminate Hamas. And I think it goes the other way around. I mean, I'll put it differently. From what I hear from senior sources in Jerusalem, Biden gave the impression that invading Rafah means for him that Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the United States, because Michigan voters, especially the Muslim voters, will not forget this and will not go to the ballot. So he loses Michigan, and that's how we lose the election. That's why Americans push Israel from not invading Rafah. This put it in a very dramatic moment for Benjamin Netanyahu. But one thing, Christian, I'm not sure Netanyahu needs those threats from his right wing. I don't think Netanyahu wants to skip Rafah. I think this is his raison d'etre these days, winning the war in an outright victory, as he defined it.
Okay, there's a lot you've put there. So obviously, people like Thomas Friedman and your friends in Washington and London also want to secure Israel with a free and full rights for the Palestinians. So let's just park that. Really interesting that you say that Netanyahu believes that the pressure he's getting is just because of Biden's upcoming election. But as you know, most people believe, outside and inside Israel, that the reason Netanyahu's not going into deals and this is because he's concerned about his own political survival, and that he cannot survive if he does anything that you heard the finance minister and the security minister and his coalition disapprove of. And they've been very clear that he mustn't, as they put it, wave the white flag.
So first of all, I can confirm that Benjamin Netanyahu is a politician that takes political considerations. But I'll tell you what the public opinion in Israel believes in. It believes in full victory over Hamas. You see it in each and every poll. The most persuasive thing for Netanyahu to do as a politician is to defeat Hamas. And as for the goodwill, I'm quite sure that President Biden wants all the best for Israelis, but there is a heated debate about what will cause it. I think the logic means that if Yahya Sinwar and Hamas as a whole get away with it and they are still standing on their feet after October 7th, so what's next? I mean, you'll still have this terrorist enemy, monstrous enemy, just 1 mile from your borders. It will not be very good for Israel. It will be devastating for Netanyahu's prospects as a politician, which are not very good these days anyway. So I think Netanyahu, or the public opinion in Israel, and this is what people in Washington don't really understand. They are not against Netanyahu because he's too hawkish. They are against Netanyahu because they see him as too dovish. For instance, 72% of the Israeli population are against this humanitarian aid to Hamas from the Israeli border. So for Netanyahu to be more popular, he needs to be more hawkish rather than the other way around.
Yeah, and you say to Hamas, the humanitarian aid, but of course it's to the Palestinian people who are in very, very, very dire straits. And that also is raising the anger around the world against Israel, as you've obviously seen, including in amongst many young people. But can I just ask you, because as you know better than I do, over the weekend, there were more proof of life videos that were sent by Hamas to you, well, in some way released, of 2 male hostages. Now, we are not running the video, but we've shown pictures. And every night, as far as we can gather, there are hostage families that blame Netanyahu for slow rolling any deal to get their loved ones back. And this is something that's really causing a huge problem. At what point does Netanyahu believe, if ever, that the hostages come first, that the families, the people of Israel comes first?
Okay, so there is a debate about the hostages. If Israel accepts this very specific deal, it means that it ends the war with 3/4 of the hostages still in Gaza, 50 minutes from here by car. 99 hostages will still be in Gaza. So the debate in Israel is not between those who want hostages back and those who don't want them because they are, they don't have anything in their heart. But the question is, what helps the most? I'll give you an example. 5 months ago, Israel put a strong military pressure on Hamas, and it got 123 hostages in return for only, I think, 8 days of ceasefire. So there is a sentiment in Israel that says, put more military power and you'll get more hostages. By the way, did anyone think, what caused, just a second, Tristan, what caused Hamas to release those video clips just seconds before Israel enters Rafah? Maybe they have something to hide there. Maybe they want to have it as a commodity. And one last thing about what you say about starvation. Prices in Gaza, and facts beg to differ. Prices in Gaza of food and humanitarian supply reduced dramatically over the last few weeks because of the humanitarian aid. Actually, today...
Some aid has got in, but it's not quite
humanitarian aid sent to Israel than before the war.
Yeah, it's not enough, as you know. No, not than before the war, maybe than before a few weeks ago. But I want to ask you, because Netanyahu has promised... No, let's not argue over figures. That's the international community, and all the aid agencies say it's not enough. There are horrendous pictures, and that is what's inflaming the world against you. But I want to ask you this, and plus the 35,000, dead. But Netanyahu has promised total victory, and you talk about victory. Most people in Israel believe that the previous hostages were released because of a negotiation. Your IDF has only managed to release 3 of them. 3 of them they killed. It's almost 7 months in. Hamas has not been beaten. And, you've got one leader, Marwan Issa, Yahya Sinwar, and the others are still there. So I think people are beginning to say, how long? How long is it until you get total victory?
I'll tell you, it won't happen without Rafah. It's necessary but not sufficient. Victory over Hamas reminds me of the COVID crisis. When during the first week, I asked a professor who gave an interview on Channel 12, my channel, when will I know it will end? It has ended. And he told me, there won't be a specific moment, but there will be a day you'll sit in a restaurant in Jerusalem with your family, and all of a sudden you'll tell each other, wow, do you remember the days when we had masks and there weren't restaurants and bars and pubs? I think the same applies for defeating terrorism. 20 years ago, Israel defeated the terrorist suicide bombers from Judea and Samaria. It took 3 or 4 years, but at the end of the day, there is no threat of suicide bombers in the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. I'll give you 2 examples. One, the number of rockets fired from Gaza reduced by 99%. The number of tunnels, terror tunnels, reduced by 70%. The ability to invade Israel and to massacre, behead, rape, and murder does not exist anymore. So I think we have to go there. And just one thing, Christian, 20 years ago, to the date, there was a letter, a presidential commitment made by President Bush in order to persuade the Israeli public to withdraw from the very specific Gaza Strip. He wrote Sharon, the then Prime Minister Sharon, that the U.S. will work to dismantle every terrorist organization that might try to seize Gaza Strip. So not only the United States does not put boots on the ground, now trying to prevent Israel from doing it, it is something that will risk not Israel, but the very commitment, the very meaning of presidential seal and presidential commitments.
So far, I think I've read you loud and clear that as far as you and your contacts know, there will be a Rafah incursion, ground. But now I want to ask you about the other news that's come up this weekend. Israeli media, so that's you all, are reporting that Israeli officials, including the Prime Minister's office, believe the International Criminal Court, the ICC, may issue arrest warrants for the Prime Minister, for the Defense Minister, and the Chief of the Defense Staff. Also, they believe they may be considering warrants for Hamas leaders. You've said the Prime Minister's office is very concerned. Can you give us some more details? Is that what you're hearing? Where are you hearing this from? Do you think that's going to happen anytime soon?
I don't think concerned is the word. Horrified is a word that better describes what is happening in the high windows, in the high places in Israel these days. Yes, they do think there is a good deal that a arrest warrant will be issued by the ICC. The latest news is that they fear that those will be discreet ones. That is to say that once Netanyahu, let's say, make a state visit to London or to Brussels, he'll get arrested there. By the way, it almost happened to the then Foreign Affairs Minister Tzipi Livni some 15 years ago following the cast-lead operation, I think, in Gaza. So it's not something new, but it's very, very dramatic. It actually puts Israelis in a very problematic situation. It's an earthquake in an unprecedented level. And to be honest, I can confirm that they are very concerned, but I cannot confirm it's going to happen.
All right, we will keep watching. Amit Segal, thank you very much indeed for joining us.